attending, those here and those on video. Like to first address the fact that there is no real reason why Mr. Conway and I both have green ties on today. It is the aftermath of St. Patrick's Day, and we're still getting over it. I appreciate everyone here and their attention to what I consider one of the more pressing issues that have come before the commission recently. And so, as a prelude to this, I think it's important that I, as the chairman and members of the commission, Commissioner Sternick is on with us today, understand two basic things about what's happened here in New York on mobile sports wagering in general, and wagering in particular, but wagering in general. And that is, it's very obvious that gambling, gaming in particular, has done really incredibly good things for the state of New York, and education in particular. The fact that we are bringing billions of dollars into the state treasury to educate our children is something that this commission and this administration is uniquely cognizant of. And I think the future of New York education, in large part, is dependent upon us and the gaming industry as a whole, mobile sports wagering, of course, in particular. It has been, of course, incredibly successful, far beyond any estimates that we had envisioned. But at the same time, we are also unique as a state entity, and I and the commission and commission staff are uniquely cognizant of the fact that with great benefit goes great responsibility. And the great responsibility here that we all have, all of us in the industry and the regulators have to understand is that there is a problem with problem gambling. There is, and it is getting increasing, and people throughout the United States are taking notice of that, and we are as well we should. So it is our responsibility, shared responsibility, not only in the commissions, but in the industry itself, to assure that the minimum amount of people are hurt by the proliferation of particularly online gambling. In late December, I participated in a video conference call with the mobile sports wagering licensee regarding practical implementations challenges in meeting the requirements of the Commission's regulations and, in fact, the laws of the state of New York. This has been an issue of ongoing personal concern to myself. And in particular, these days, I find myself paying far more attention to the advertising on the sports networks than I do sports itself. And in fact, today, as I was watching one of the sports shows in the hotel before coming here, I noticed a number of interludes within that sports show where there was a discussion of how one would best place a wager on the upcoming NCAA tournament, with the best wager, the best bang for the buck, things of that sort, which was in my mind, has clearly raised some of the issues even today of what we're talking about today. The statutory obligations placed on mobile sports wagering licensees are quite clear. This is by statute, this is not by the commission. The law requires that each advertisement shall clearly and conspicuously state a problem gambling hotline number. The law draws that definition of advertising very broadly. Paraphrased, an advertisement is any notice or communication to the public or any information, and I stress that, concerning the gaming-related business of a mobile sports wagering licensee through broadcasting, publication, other means. Promotional activities are specifically considered advertising. Anyone watching sports events, as I did today, say there's a blurring between pre-event discussions and sports betting amongst questions I saw today. What was the best way? What was the most efficient way? What was the way to get the most bang for your buck? How that all came about was a blurring. And it's what, is that news or is it in fact enticement? And that's a question that we struggled with for some time. Either way, we, the regulators and our licensees, the operators, share a common goal in wanting to be full compliance with the applicable laws and regulations, have a common understanding of what is the subject of the law really requires full compliance. To this end, I've asked staff to pull together today's educational listening session for you and for us, with local sports wagering operators, New York State Office of Addiction Services, and other interested parties to identify and resolve difficulties. My goal today is to understand a better understanding why, in my opinion, there appears to be substantial non-compliance by mobile sports wagering operators with the statutes, company regulation. Commissioner Skurnick is joining me here today on video. I also welcome the participation of representatives of OASIS, New York State Office of Addiction Services and Support, and Jim Manny and Michelle Hayes, Council on Problem Gambling. I'd like to recognize that 24 corporate entities representing nearly 36 different licensees are participating here in Schenectady by video conferencing. This includes representatives from mobile sports wagering, video lottery, off-track betting, racetracks, and commercial casinos. The mere fact that you're participating here underscores your commitment to an open and responsible gaming practice. This is really meant for me to be a listening session to you, to listen to what you have to say, to find out what our common goals are, what our common concerns are. And in that case, I am going to open the floor shortly to an informal discussion. It's just that. For those in the room, of course, just raise your hand and we'll be able to recognize you. For those that are on video, Lee will be handling this since nobody gives me any opportunity to do that, knowing my my sense of computers and the video stuff of that sort. The session is being recorded and will be posted later on the. It's not live streamed now, but it will be posted later on the Commission's website. So I'm going to pose a number of questions. I ask each one of you to think about them and to respond, because that's how I can get a better sense, how the Commission staff who's with us today can get a better sense of your concerns and how we can go forward in addressing those concerns before we go much further into to any sort of new regulations or regulatory enforcement. The first question I have for all of you, and please respond, is there anything in your mind unclear about our law and our regulations regarding sports gaming? Crystal clear? I'm not hearing any response, and that's a shame because I would obviously number of you would come up to us. Stated.
Well,
thank you. And I promise I won't bite, and I thank you very much for that.
Vice President of Compliance with the NBM. I wouldn't say, I have to first give kudos to the staff. Christine has been great to work with. Anytime we've had clarifying questions, she's quick to answer via email, as is Jim Gugas and Olivia, and will entertain a meeting with us anytime we need one. I think that for us, you know, the specifications around disclaimers at times have been a challenge. I think at this point, as we've matured in our operations in New York, we've got the sizing down, 5%, 2%, the majority sizing requirement for disclaimers. But at times there's come into question, if we have like panel advertising, do we need the full disclaimer on each panel of that advertisement rather? Because BetMGM specifically advertises at Penn Station. Okay, so you're walking down the hallway and there's panels. And is it duplicative to have the disclaimer across several panels, or can we have it in the central one that is like the main image? Similarly, so for the QR code, how many times do you have to include the QR code? Now, the requirement to have them is clear. That's not ambiguous to us. It's just a judgment call at times. And we all, I'm speaking on behalf of all, endeavor to always operate within compliance. But I think sometimes knowing if we're doing exactly what you want, I'm sure Christine's tired of getting emails from us because we submit every single thing, and go back and forth sometimes, but well, no, you need it on every piece. And so I wouldn't say that the regulations are unclear exactly. It's just that there is some ambiguity about use case.
That's very fair. Yeah. Do you feel the need to clear every single thing with the office?
I think we do at times because, I mean, obviously we've advertised, you know, year over year, quarter over quarter. And so we see precedent set from the prior quarter. So we don't go back to Christine because we know what she's requested of us previously and we'll just repeat it. But then when there's any type of question, I'd rather be safe than sorry. So I come to staff and ask because I'd rather just know explicitly, yes, this is permitted versus get a notice of non-compliance. But I think that, you know, at times we feel that specific to the QR code, a patron is getting just as much information from looking at the disclaimer and seeing the helpline number as they're getting the same information by scanning the QR code. So sometimes it's duplicative. And so would ask that there maybe be consideration given to, I wouldn't say one or the other because the QR code doesn't say anything to someone, right? I'm reading the New York State Gaming Commission sign but if there's a QR code, it wouldn't do anything for me. So I think that maybe considering eliminating some use cases of the QR code would be a favorable outcome for sports wagering operators.
Let's certainly will take that into consideration. Yes.
Corey Box, Senior Vice President for Public Policy and Sustainability at FanDuel. I think, first of all, thank you for this. Thank you. Good time. It's Problem Gambling Awareness Month. I want to say a couple things. One is,
By the way, thank you. I was supposed to mention that.
The RG disclaimer, which I think is what we're talking about, what your comments were about, is really just one piece of a robust responsible gaming program that will protect customers in the way that you were describing. And, you know, I don't want to lose sight of all the other things that operators are doing to protect customers.
But, you know, why don't you just indicate some of those? I think that's important.
Yeah, sure. So at its base, with our regulatory obligations, we have a number of tools available so that you can limit your play in a way that users feel best for them. There's the self-exclusion list. FanDuel, we launched a TV show called The Comeback earlier this week, which is Craig Carton, a local TV and radio host, talking about his gambling problems as well as having on guests who have gone through gambling problems so that our betting audience can see what that looks like. So we're also launching some new product features that will identify users who are maybe betting at a level that they're not comfortable with and trying to give them an extra opportunity to check in at that point before they deposit. So a number of different pieces we're putting together to try to protect users on our site, that the very small percentage, the 1 to 2% that do have a gambling problem from betting more than they're comfortable with. So where I was going to go was, the thing that we sometimes find challenging with the way that the rules are written is, I know that the definition of an advertisement is broad. However, a lot of the sports betting operators are attempting to have integrations with sports programming, like the one that you were describing potentially, where we are woven into the fabric of how folks are describing game, because those who bet really enjoy that kind of content, and it's a great way for us to reach our potential customers who are sports watchers. And so where exactly that becomes an advertisement versus an integration can be a challenge. The other challenge for us is, many sports are broadcast nationally, and it's easier for us to use a national hotline than a state-specific hotline. So we've been looking for solutions to that problem as well.
Yes.
Elliot Kelly, DraftKings. I sort of just want to build upon what was discussed there in terms of, I think basically the breakdown between where sort of guidance documents that have been issued by the commission that sort of build upon the regulations that you sort of discussed. There have been a few guidance documents that have been issued. One of those was providing direction on CTAs. And I think it sort of focused on 3 areas. It was the specific verbs in the messaging. It was, utilizing images of people in acts of gaming, and then the citation of the websites. And this was sort of really helpful and useful in making sort of compliance decisions as we go through the process of building a marketing campaign. And I think it's really helpful to understand, and sort of sometimes I am guilty of not appreciating the sort of level of work that really goes into building the final asset. And I think it's being able to sort of rely and understand on the guidance that has been issued formally, and sort of working on a way of building upon that guidance in a more formal manner, as opposed to sort of more of a case-by-case basis. And I think it just really sort of helps the understanding with where the issues are, understanding what the goal is if we are going to change something, and then having meetings like this where we can discuss on what is the best approach in order to get to that end goal. I think you started, we all do share a shared goal, and that is specifically to comply with the regulations and provide our players with the needed responsible gaming resources. And I will also touch upon the use of the national disclosure for sort of the 1-800-GAMBLER number. You've mentioned it, but the whole industry has grown. We have sort of sports betting across the nation now, and more are coming online, and the industry is going to evolve, and the industry is going to increase. And being able to have sort of a national solution to sort of the national problem gaming, I think is helpful. We having sort of a number of different state-specific helplines, I think, can sometimes create more complexity. And being able to have a simple, easy to remember, and sort of nationally recognized resource for customers, I think does help when it comes to these integrations that you're talking about, when we don't necessarily control the size of the ad space. I mean, I'm also guilty of this, where I sort of think, oh, press enter and you've got another line there, and then you can add more words to it. But the reality of it is, we as operators don't control that. The broadcasters control editable space, non-editable space, and being able to have sort of the guidance there in like sort of a formal manner, I think really does help throughout the entire process of this sort of marketing campaign.
That's very helpful to me. Thank you. Yeah. Again, I just want to go back to my original remarks here. I think before we go too much further, I mean, what your comments are? Do we have any lead? No, they weren't fully my bait too. I think the industry has grown, and as we see forward, and as there are many more sports programs which seem to be integrating. And obviously, it makes perfectly good sense that if you're selling a product, you want to be on the channel that's talking about the product. That I'm seeing things that I consider to be very close to non-compliance, not over. And before we go too much further, and I think it's important that we all kind of look at that and see where we are, where we're going and how we do it. So, I mean, we are, the legislation is pretty specific. And we're responsible for enforcing those regs. It's not our regs, it's legislation. So I think it's important to go back and make some understand where we're at with this. And part of that, when we get on to the next question, let me just follow that. With you, what either regulatory or statutory changes would you like to see in terms of our regulation involving advertising? Where you'd like to go with this? There's somebody there, nobody's paying attention out there.
I know, right?
All right, well, let's follow up with that. People here. I think you already mentioned some of it. Maybe you could elucidate a little further on that.
Very specifically, being permitted to use 1-800-GAMBLER for national advertisements, which we are all in agreement. Adding Hope New York to national advertisements, there are a few states who still require state-specific advertising in national ads, but BetMGM is live in 30 jurisdictions. It does make it a challenge to ensure that legible visibility and equal weight is given to every helpline number when you have 30, and we started with 30. There was very few states and I've been with the company for 5 years, and we were live in 1 jurisdiction, so I've seen this grow. If we were allowed to use 1-800-GAMBLER in national advertising, we would be very happy, but that would have to be a directive from you, because right now we are required to have Hope New York in every advertisement.
Right.
And to your point, we're compliance folks, we're not marketers or designers. And so it's a pain point they come to me with, every other day. It feels like probably quarterly, really, about do we still use state specific, Arizona is another example, but it's a challenge. And we want to make sure the patient protection remains paramount for all of us. And in order to do so, we need to present clear and conspicuous helpline access to patrons in need.
Just want to point out, there are a number of other states that also have state-specific responsible gaming hotlines that have made provisions within their regulations to allow for 1-800-GAMBLER to be used for national advertising, even though local advertising is still required to use the state-based number. So there is a precedent for that sort of regulation. And I think within the statute, it just requires that there is a problem gambling hotline. It doesn't require a specific. So that's helpful.
Right.
So some states have used it where the national is just the 1-800 and the other is.
And then if you're advertising
You're
locally,
like, it's like if you're on local news here, we would use the help.
right, or at Penn Station or that sort of.
Yeah. That is helpful.
And to add on to that, and you guys keep me honest, but the 1-800-GAMBLER number, if a New Yorker called it, they would be directed to the New York
Correct.
number, correct?
Exactly.
So there's substantively no difference, right? You achieve the goal of driving that person who feels they have a problem to the resources you need in a less confusing way.
I don't know whether anybody from Oasis wants to address the utilization of the Hope line, but if they don't, perhaps we can at least elucidate as to why we do what we do. I'm happy to talk on that, but I think it's really Oasis is,
Yeah,
they're on the line. We'll see whether they're paying attention.
She just said she's gonna try that.
Good, let her
Hi, am I
Sure.
unmuted? Am I good?
Yeah, we hear you.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Cooper from OASIS. I am the coordinator for all problem gambling services across the state. And first, I just want to thank you, Chair, for hosting this. I think it's a great dialogue. And I think, I'll dive right into the Hope Line number and the specific Hope Line number for New York State and why that is our primary line for residents in New York State. When everything that we brand that goes out in our public awareness advertising across the board, the direct call to action is to the New York State Hope Line. And oftentimes that is the person's first point of contact when they reach out for help. We understand, the comments about the 800 gambler number. And while we're not an affiliate of the New York Council or the National Council on Problem Gambling, we do work with them on several things. One of the biggest challenges with 800 gambler is that I think someone made a comment, if you call from New York State, it automatically rolls. So the way that that it actually works is the rollover to any other state hotline is based on the area code that someone calls from. So it's not foolproof. So it doesn't mean if someone calls the national line and they are from New York State that it automatically rolls to our Hope Line seamlessly. If they got a cell phone in another state or let's say they got a cell phone in New York State with a New York State area code and they move to Iowa. When they call the Hope Line or the national line from Iowa, it's going to roll to our New York State Hope Line. It's not going to roll to either 1-800-GAMBLER because sometimes they pick up the phone or whatever the backend number that Iowa uses. So, when we talk about complexity with the multiple numbers, I think our goal is to make sure that those that are currently experiencing a problem or at risk can get to help as soon as possible. And so New York State residents that call and do not, if they don't have an area code in New York State, they're not going to get rolled to the correct state for them to get help. So that's just a little bit of our, background and history. The other piece of that is certainly understand the advertising piece as well. We have a whole package of public awareness campaigns specifically related to gambling and gambling harms. And we are happy to work with you guys if you're interested in partnering on that or using our campaigns, anything like that, that posts the specific for the Hope Line when you're advertising in New York.
Thank you. Thank you for your work on that. And thank you for Oasis for their work in the field. Let me get to I think the nub of my question here, because I think it's a question that ultimately is going to be one that I'm wrestling with and the commission is therefore wrestling with. And that is the whole question of when I'm listening, I hear particularly odds on it are being disseminated. Points 3-1, whatever it's going to be. That appears, frankly, to me, to trigger our regulations in terms of disclaimers and hopefully whatever. Others have, frankly, have a different viewpoint of mine, and I'd like to hear from the industry. And that should like happened this morning, when we hear what are the odds on a certain game? What are the point spreads? What's a good bet versus what's a bad bet? That would appear to me to have challenge to trigger our regulations and our statute. Others are frankly disagree. And I think one of the reasons I called this today is to hear from the industry and let them opine as to whether we need to move further in that regard, or whether this is informational or First Amendment protected dissemination of information. So I'm willing to hear someone talk about that. Yes, sir.
Elliot Kelly at DraftKings.
Yeah.
So I think the interesting part about odds is that I think odds can be used for sports fans and not just sports bettors. It provides a number of information about a forecast for a given game. I think, you know, let's just take March Madness as an example. I'm not a college basketball fan, but I'm probably going to watch a game. And I'm going to have maybe two factors that I'm going to think about in terms of what is the game that I want to watch. And that's going to be a close game and a high scoring game. Now, in order to try to figure that out, there's a ways of me doing that. And that would be, I can see the spread between the game. And if that spread is a small number, it is forecast to be a relatively close game. And I can look at the over-under. And if the over-under is, you know, higher than all the rest, it's forecast to be quite a high scoring game. Combine those two together, and that is more than likely going to be a game that I would be wanting to watch. And I think the key factor there is that I am assessing that information for entertainment purposes. Like, I want to know what game I want to watch, and I can't bet. I don't bet. So none of that is sort of being used in a manner of I am looking at that in order to make an assessment on a bet. And, you know, when you combine that and have a logo there, I think the important aspect of that is it's much more of a citation of source. You know, if you have a sort of, let's just say, a news outlet, and there's a quote from a news outlet, and there's nothing there that really explains the source, you do not really know whether that has credibility, where that sort of information comes from. And I think the same can be said about odds. Like, without providing where those odds come from, it lacks that credibility that the odds being provided are legitimate. You know, you can rely on this forecast because it comes from a reputable operator. And so I think, you know, I understand the challenge. I agree with it, but I think that is sort of where we would look at. There's a differentiation between the odds being presented are there for more sort of informational purposes.
I would agree with that because from BetMGM, we look at it as, is this fact? Are we presenting the audience with a fact? Or are we trying to engage the audience in a CTA to come wager with us with an inducement? So if we're presenting odds as a fact, we go through this, we operate in Ontario, and there's very specific rules around inducement. So is what is being discussed factually accurate, or are we trying to present an inducement? An inducement would require a disclaimer. A fact, we don't necessarily feel would.
would that rely on the context of how you were presenting the information?
Absolutely. If Sarah Brennan is saying, come bet with BetMGM, there's deposit match offer, and here, by the way, are our odds today, that I'm propositioning that as an inducement for you to come engage on my site and play with me. But if I'm Sarah Brennan, just a guest on a show saying the odds today are X, that I'm not asking you to come play with me, I'm just telling you what the odds are.
But frankly, that's what I'm wrestling with. You know, I appreciate that because that's where I am, and I'm sure the rest of the commission is. They said before, the line is blurry, and how what crosses what does not is something that I have to be basically educated in.
I really think you have to think of it as, are they requesting a patron to engage in an action, or is it just informational? It's Elliot's.
Can I hear from the rest of you?
I agree with our friends at BetMGM and DraftKings. The context is really critical. I agree with the distinction Sarah drew. And, you know, as I described before, these integrations are an important part of how we're trying to present ourselves to sports fans. And so it can be challenging in the context of those integrations to do this, but I think we draw that same distinction.
And I'd like to say something real quick about that as well. Michael Bean from Fanatics Betting and Gaming. I think especially when it comes to these integrations and especially when it comes to these lines, it's important to determine whether there is a call to action. As Sarah brought up, you know, if there's a promotion associated with Duke tonight being, you know, minus 35, whatever points it is tonight, but you know, if there's a promotion associated with that, like if Duke wins by 45 or more, based on this line, then I think that does require the Hope New York line. But when, you know, one of our companies is posting on social media and it's tonight's games, see the matchups and the point spreads, there's no call to action other than informational. I lean the other way. I think it's more of, you know, it's a social media post. These are all the games tonight. Wow, Duke is a heavy favorite. One of the other things is, I'm only going to speak for Fanatics here, but you can see it throughout the industry is, let's say social media, for example, or maybe an integration is RG, in our opinion, is always one click away. Okay. So if you're on social media and let's say you would click on the Fanatics Sportsbook name, underneath that name is going to be problem gambling, hotline numbers, is also going to be a link to our app. Once you've gone through the KYC process and we've made sure that you're not on, you know, the statewide self-exclusion list or so be it, there's many resources within the app and a prominent RG logo that individuals can click on to go through all of the, you know, RG checklists that we as Fanatics may have. So that's, would you like to set a deposit limit? Would you like to set a wager limit? Would you like to, you know, would you like to set a weekly wager limit? There's all these behind the scenes tech innovations that each one of us as sports wagering operators are investing in. And I think that those investments in RG is something that is not prominently displayed in commission meetings because it's within that. And the last thing is, there's Fanatics specifically, is not only are we investing in app enhancements for responsible gambling, but we've also partnered with a digital healthcare company called Birch's Health. Okay, it's free if you have insurance, and it's free if you don't have insurance. And individuals within our app on Fanatics can message with an individual from Birch's Health who are trained in problem gambling and can get you the help and resources that you need. And we actually intend, as part of the Problem Gambling Awareness Month, to deploy it in New York tomorrow.
This is incredibly helpful. All right, go ahead.
Sorry, I did just want to add one other thing as well. And it came to mind when you talked about lines, but you know, if we are talking about odds as being provided information, you know, if there are injuries that occur during it, those dramatically change the odds of the game. And so it's sort of like, where does that line end? If we have a broadcaster talking about an injury, is that still in some ways referencing into sports betting, because it does dramatically change what, you know, if the best player gets injured moments before the game, the odds are going to quickly change. So yeah, I agree, it's a difficult thing to, you know, have the line between it, but I just think that the odds in and of itself is really akin to that same idea of, you know, an injury, a forecast of the game, whether something's going to be a higher or lower pointage. It's definitely something to sort of keep in mind.
Right, and it's an endeavor to educate people really, because an informed better is a more sustainable better, a better educated better is less likely to have specific issues because they know what they're doing.
You would hope.
We would hope, but I'm just saying, you know, it's like, we would like people to know as much as they can before placing a wager.
Where do you think the context of it? I think the two things that got out of this thing, thankfully, I agree. One is I thank you for broadening the discussion not only on particular issue, but the whole question, which is, you know, responsible gambling and your efforts to ensure that people are very appreciative of that information. But getting back to my original thing, I'm trying to, again, maybe you can help me in terms of where you think the context is and not as advocates for your positions in terms of what constitutes an inducement or a call to action, what does not constitute a call to action. Please.
So I think a call to action in my eyes is exactly that. It's telling someone to bet now, you are telling someone to play now, you are telling someone to download the app. I think merely showing the odds of something does not rise to that level of call to action because of this fact that, if you see the word bet now, there's only one interpretation of that. That is that you are encouraging someone in order to place a bet. If you see odds that are on the screen, like I said before, you can be looking at that to try to determine whether a game is worthwhile in your eyes to watch. So I think that, in my eyes, is the sort of distinction. A CTA is something that is encouraging customers to make an action.
But let me, without getting into specifics, I don't think that's appropriate, but even today, what bothered me in particular is we had this sports game, the sports program, the one, showing the top 10 games, top 10 plays and all that. But within that, there was somebody who was obviously or something of the betting portion. And that seemed to me to cost a lot. You see what I'm saying? We didn't go from the announcer telling us that the odds are today, what they're saying on such and so. We went to someone who's saying what the best bet was, or I'm from the betting portion of this company, and we're showing you how that is. And we were talking about contextual inferences there. And I know you were all compliance people. God bless the compliance people, they get it from everybody, so. Been one myself, so it's, I just want to know contextually where you think this lines up.
I think I'm trying to go further than the way my colleagues have described it, but for us, it's really when it is a call to go to your site and place a wager, as opposed to just discussing the odds as they exist on the site. Understood that if it's there are some difficult scenarios where that people walk right up to the line. I think as compliance folks, we do try to make sure that we stay on the right side of that line, but it can be challenging.
I think what you're asking is like, if we've got a brand ambassador, right, participating in this editorial comment, and he's saying, this is my bet for today, this is what I would bet. Like, is that an inducement, right? Because
Yes.
you've got somebody, it's more than just saying, here's the odds. It's someone suggesting a wager to you.
And this is a good bet today.
Right. And so is that an advertisement or not? And is that really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Jimmy and you, Council Problem Gambling. If you take it from the gambler side, I won't keep it long, think all day. The gambler sees Mike Greenberg, and it's an advertisement the whole time he speaks, regardless if he's doing his ad or he's on Get Up for 2 hours. Every time he speaks, the gambler thinks he is putting it out there as an act. So I'm just speaking from the gambler's part. And I think my last point is that as long as we're gonna do, we should get the gambler's view also on these things. I think it's equally important as our views, right? How do they see things? So I think if we're going to educate everybody, I think we need to do that. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, that's fair. I think obviously the reason you're here is to represent those people who have problems. And we're happy for you, more than happy. To be fair. Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just wanted to go back to some of the discussion about access to services and care. And I think it's great that, you know, you guys are aware of the need for services. And, you know, I just wanted to put out there that according to the mental hygiene law in New York State, OASIS oversees all services for substance use and or problem gambling in the state. And for any entity to provide those services in New York State, they have to be certified and or otherwise granted authority by OASIS to provide those services in New York. So I know, you know, you just mentioned Birch's Health, and I know that several other of you contract with Cambridge Health as well. But in order for them to be able to provide those specific services in New York State to New York State residents, they would have to come through OASIS and go through that process. And I can tell you, you know, that we have had outreach from one of these programs already, inquiring about the information. But I just wanted to, you know, put that out there as well, that they do need to be certified by OASIS in order to provide those services specifically in New York State, and to be added to our primary referral line to provide those services. And then the other thing I just wanted to go back to related to the Hope Line, which I failed to mention, which is a very important point to make also, why we only use the Hope Line number in New York State, is that Hope Line number is operated by Vibrant Behavioral Health out of New York City. They also have the 988 suicide national line number as well. And our Hope Line operators are either bachelor's or master's level clinicians that are trained specifically in gambling, substance use, and crisis intervention. And so what that means is that if someone calls in crisis, they do not have to get transferred anywhere else. I do know 800 Gambler, if that number is picked up by other places, most of them are not crisis trained to deal with crisis, so they have to get referred again. And so from our perspective, we want people, A, to be able to be assessed immediately if they're in crisis, and B, to be able to access, you know, care within New York State.
Thank you. Right, I would like to hear, I think we've covered everything on this, and I'm very, very appreciative of everybody being here. But I'd like to hear some final thoughts, if anyone would like to come in with some final thoughts on this. This will be very helpful for me and the commission in terms of understanding where you're coming from. And frankly, I think it's also important for us to, you know, take this from the narrow viewpoint that I was at, to the whole thing of what you're doing and what Oasis is doing. There is a problem again. That's something I would like to hear. Frankly, I'd like to hear more from you. If you could, at our next commission meeting, our next commission meeting is Monday, so we're not going to do it then. I'm not going to put everybody to work over the weekend, but certainly by our next commission meeting, I would like to present what you're doing in total to the other members of the commission. We welcome submissions from all of you in that regard.
That was actually going to be my final recommendation, would be that we all have really robust responsible play programs and patient protection programs. We use Kindbridge, the mental health treatment provider. They've confirmed certification in New York. I've got my RG director messaging me to make sure with Rebecca's comments in mind. And so we do a lot that I think doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily the glamorous side of our business, but we would love to present to you all of the things we do to ensure that patrons are protected and have resources at their fingertips, and not just patrons. You don't have to be logged into the app to have these resources available to you. And I think that's a really important thing for folks to know. You don't have to register for an account. You don't have to be a patron. GameSense and access to Kindbridge and all of our RG resources that are state specific are available to anybody who looks at betmgm.com or who looks at the app.
Just going to say, thank you for having us. Thank you for having the conversation. On behalf of FanDuel, I'd like to take Rebecca up on her offer to discuss how we can better publicize the Oasis resources, and happy to work with you on that. I just urge the commission as we move forward to figure out a solution that works in 2025 with national media and national sports advertising. We'd like to make sure that every customer can get help when they need help, but also that it's workable. Anybody else?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd also like to just sort of talk about the responsible gaming that DraftKings has. I think we somewhat recently launched the My Stat Sheet, which has been a massive success and sort of shows customers a very clear understanding of the deposits and wagering that they do, and I think it's been really helpful for our players to sort of understand that. We just did the Gambler RG campaign. You might be able to see it and hear it, but it's a really great responsible gaming resource and promoting playing responsibly. But I would just like to sort of end on very much appreciative of having this meeting, and I really do think having more regular, more formalized meetings where we can discuss challenges that are arising. The industry is expanding, it's evolving. Technology is obviously changing all the time, and I think being able to have these types of discussions where we can understand what are the emerging challenges, and doing that really allows us to be proactive, and we can really understand where issues are arising and seek how do we get to a resolution in a sort of a great manner. So yeah, I would really encourage if we could do sort of more formalized meetings sort of like this with operators.
It's been incredibly valuable to me. I can assure you that.
And Katie Neer, a lobbyist for the SBA, I think I now or make a technical recommendation for moving forward. I think this is an excellent discussion, and I think even the comments from the Problem Gambling Council are really important. And I think this issue of what is a call to action is clearly right and likely has evolved in the last few years. And so there is, the statute, and then there is the regulations, and then of course there's the guidance document from 2022, which does flesh out specifically what a call to action is, which is what drives their compliance. And I think to the extent that needs to be updated and changed based on this discussion or based on how advertising has changed, I would just call for an open kind of process of an opportunity for public comment, both from the gamblers and from the operators, just so that there's consistent understandings across the board between operators on what the expectation on compliance is. Because at the end of the day, for responsible gaming messaging to work, it needs to be consistent for the constituents.
Do I have somebody? Yes.
I think you're coming to me. I don't know for sure, so I'm just going to start talking. Good afternoon. My name is Rich Taylor, Director of Responsible Gambling. I would urge, since we're talking about the National Council on Problem Gambling's helpline number, 1-800-GAMBLER, that we extend an invitation to somebody from that organization to discuss what those services look like. My understanding is that they do undergo some pretty thorough training, especially around crisis management and how to talk to someone in crisis. And I think it would be helpful to hear their perspective on this. I also understand that from my friends who've called 1-800-GAMBLER in the state of New York, that they are being routed automatically to the Hope line. So that may be worth exploration as well to look at that and validate if that's true or not. But I do think the NCPG should be invited to this so that they can share how they train their helpline staff and ensure that we have a good understanding of what that looks like, even if the automatic routing is not happening.
Okay, but that's fair, and certainly I will follow up on that myself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Not hearing none. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. I really appreciate this. It's been incredibly helpful to me and to my staff. And I look forward to some of the follow from your comments, and I think we'll have follow up on many of the issues.
Thank you.
Thank you.